Okay, let's reconvene the meeting. We have been joined by the mayor of Ridgecrest now, and Madam Mayor, if you would come and tell us a little bit from your perspective how things went and what you would like to see more of or done differently.
Good afternoon, all. I appreciate you being here. This means so much to us because you may have come to learn from us, but we're going to get a whole lot more from you. So thank you for that. I wanted to start out by telling you a couple of things that happened and then maybe ask for some assistance. On July 4th, as I was just sharing a few minutes ago, I was driving down the road headed to the hospital. It was a day off, and I was going over there to see if there was anything we could do to help. And I'm going to make a left turn. I'm in the turn lane, and my car starts bouncing up and down like this. And I'm thinking, I have 4 flat tires. Oh my goodness, how did that happen? And the person riding with me pulls on the emergency brake and says, "Silly, this is an earthquake." And when I realized that's what it was, I thought, this isn't going to be a holiday. This is going to be a work day. So we all took off and went back to the city, try to see where we were. And it was about 20 minutes later. I had just gotten to City Hall, and I got a call from Governor Newsom saying, "What can I do to help?" I was surprised at all get out because I didn't think he even knew where Ridgecrest was, let alone what was happening here. And I said, and he called me on my cell phone, and he said, "We want to know what we can do for you." And in looking at that, I talked to Jed, and I said, he says, "We're out assessing. We can't say what we need yet because we don't know that." And I said, "I promise I'll call you back as soon as we can give you a verbal report that tells you as much as we can, as quickly as we can." So we're working on that. We were here all that night. And the next day when we had the 7-1, he called me right up 5 minutes after the quake, and he said, "I will be there. I'm coming in the C-130, and I think it was 21 department heads that are going to be here with me. I want to know. I'm not waiting for an invitation." And I said, come, sir, please. Thank you, thank you. And as I realized, I thought, it's a spirit of cooperation that makes things go so much better. You all give us the opportunity, the governor and his staff and all the people he brought said, "I'm here, count me in." There weren't a lot of people at that level saying anything except our state senator and our assemblyman, Congressman McCarthy and Senator Feinstein. Staff of Senator Harris was on the phone. And before we even got through the first day when we had on July 4th, we had half of Kern County here. The fire department, we had people from every single law enforcement agency that we could find, and most of them came voluntarily. I understand what mutual aid is now. I thought I did. I thought I understood. We all help each other. I didn't realize the significance of making the differences with all the fire people that came, all the law enforcement people that came. What made it so good is then the very next day, we had FEMA, we had OES here, we had everybody here, and they helped us understand our emergency plan. We had an emergency plan. Yep, you know what? We look at it every year and we say, this is what we should, would, could. And you know what? This man did it. He made it, the emergency plan, a reality. And we all followed Judd's path and how to make this happen. And as more and more people came here and said, count me in, we had all of our elected representatives show up, and they offered service. As we got further and further in the process, I asked a couple of things, and I don't criticize a single soul for the way things were done, but I would ask, when we look at, and I'm asking your assistance in this, when we look at how the damages are appropriated that FEMA had done, we did not qualify for the FEMA funding, and the percentage of what would happen in Ridgecrest if we had $54 million worth of damages, we could have qualified. But $54 million in San Bernardino, in Barstow, in Landers, in everywhere, any other big city would have been 3 or 4 buildings, not a town. And so I'm asking if we can look at how those monies are determined. Can they be on a percentage basis that is more equitable that could happen? I realize you guys don't control that at all, but you make recommendations to our governor and all the people who make those kind of decisions and look at it and say, is there a fair and equitable way to determine what should be the premise for getting funding from FEMA? After all, and all the dollars that go into FEMA come from the entire state and everywhere else, and we need help to make that happen. The other thing I'd like to say is people like you who show up to learn from what we can do better, we also want to learn what we could do better from you. As I was sharing a little while ago, we had many people who stood up and said, count me in. Kern County Fire Department went above and beyond. All the fire departments that came from all over the state, all over the county, were here, as well as California Highway Patrol and many of the law enforcement agencies. When they realized after the first quake, it wasn't quite as bad as they thought, so we'll just start heading home. And the next day, they were back. They hadn't even gotten home and they were back. So that is what cooperation is. That is what mutual aid is. That is what understanding, should something happen to you, we will be there too. Because it is part of our commitment to all of the state, to all of our residents, to all the families in this community that say, I expect you to do. And you did. And we will too. So I'm wondering if any of you have any ideas of what we could do better, because we've looked at our response. We've looked at the response from all of the entities, and we want to learn too. We probably aren't going to have another earthquake unless the USGS says, wait a minute. Have you shared the story that when he told us already?
Yeah. Ken kind of touched on it a little bit.
They were here Friday night looking at all the damages and out examining the faults. And when Mr. Hednick came back and said, wow, I see a lot of damage that look like the Superstition Mountains quake, and I see things that are the same. And he said, I'm not making a prediction, so don't say anything that I'm predicting. But he said, I could say in a few hours, maybe a month, not too long, you're going to see a 7. So I'm call my supervisor, Mick Gleason, up from Kern County, and having sat on the GSA, Groundwater Sustainability Agency, I had said, Mick, we need to get this man here looking at how this affects our water and how we're going to achieve sustainability in an overdrafted basin. And Mick says, yeah, what did he say? And so I start telling him. Now this is, mind you, less than an hour after we had gotten this prediction, which wasn't a prediction. And I'm trying to stand up, and we're both going, oh my God, it's an earthquake. And I'm standing in our situation center, and Jed is I just got through chemotherapy not too long ago, and Jed, and not real steady on my feet, and Jed is trying to drag me out of there because I can't stand. And the fact that all those entities, all the USGS and what they gave us, he made that real for us. I'm not a physicist, I'm not a geologist, I'm an ordinary person. But this man, in less than 45 minutes or an hour, made those earthquakes real. And so I'm talking to CNN on the video when they were here, and I'm telling them about this giant of a USGS scientist who helped made those quakes real to us, and how we prepare, what we do, what we watch for. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, "Please don't use the word prediction again. I can't predict those. I'm just telling you what may happen." But meanwhile, I called him a prognosticator extraordinaire who could say, this is what's going to happen. So I've asked him if I'm going to win the lottery, and he refused to tell me. So anyhow, all I'm asking is that we look at what you think, because you have greater expertise than all of us, what you think we could do to be better, what you think you can do to help us be more of an aid to all those mutual aid people around us. What can we do? I know we have another giant sitting here, and Jed has made all of this possible with the help of his staff and many, many others. So I don't want to crown him king. I just want to say that King Jed was king for a week. Now he's just a normal chief who tries to respond to everything. We are looking for opportunities, because what we learned is shareable. What we've done is doable. What we can do is even more. And so as we do that, as we talk to all the entities around us, and we sent Governor Newsom, we sent Kevin McCarthy, Senator Harris, Senator Feinstein, and Senator Grove and Assemblyman Fong, all our lists of damages. And in giving them that list, we help them assist us. We help them to understand that even though when they came up here and they didn't see a whole lot of damage, there was significant damage that wasn't visible. But I am grateful for all the laws and the inspectors and the people who built up to earthquake standards. And that's why had we not had buildings that were as recent as the ones we have, you'd have seen a lot more damage, of which I wouldn't have been a bit proud, but I would have taken your money. But nonetheless, we come to the point of saying we have a job to do, and our job is to help bring this community back to what it was, help bring the base back to what it was, only better, and restore confidence in all of the people who deal with emergencies. We still have, there was a lady who lived down the street and around the corner from me, and she's 82 years old, and she still sleeps in her garage because that's as close as she'll get to her house. And I'm thinking mental health capacities and people dealing with young people. When I went to, when the Red Cross was here, and I went into our areas where we had many, many families sleeping, and the kids are having a great time. During the day, they were having a great time playing games. It was a big, fun time for all them. But when came night, I watched children crying, "I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to sleep in my bed." They couldn't. And so with your help, with the help of all the entities, and with funding and the opportunities, we will have those kids all back in their beds, and we thank you. And I appreciate your time. You will never know how much it means to us to have you here, because you are going to affect our futures. So I say thank you. Is there anything else I can answer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Turn your switch on here. Thank you. Are there questions for the mayor?
I have a question, but I'll go at the end.
Okay. Commissioners? You're at the end.
I have a question for you, Mayor. There's a vacant position for law enforcement on the Seismic Safety Commission. Would the city consider the chief as an applicant to the governor's office for that position?
I would consider it. I am not sure how the chief would, because this is his home and his community, and I know where his first love is. He has his family here. He's a football coach. The kids all in this community think our chief walks on water. And I think having children who understand the chief of police is out working with them and their football teams is a lot. But
This is not a permanent position. This is just as the commission meets twice every other month. His time would be very valuable, I think, and a great service. He's the only chief in the country that's experienced an event from a city like this. I mean, this is a unique community, and just our discussions with him is quite amazing
I
what
would
he's done.
say thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Chief? Say yes.
Come on, Jed, you should do it. I'd be honored to do it.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. If there's anything we can do to continue to help you understand who we are and what we are, we're here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Chief, if you would consider applying for that position, I do think your direct experience would bring a level of value another law enforcement professional just couldn't. The time commitment is not significant. Most of our meetings are in Sacramento. It'd be tough for you to go up the morning of, but if you went up, the afternoon before and came back the afternoon of a meeting, twice a year we have 2-day meetings like this one. So it's not a huge time commitment. I think you'd enjoy it, and I think you'd be valuable. If it's something you're interested in, our staff will walk you through what the process of an application is, and go from there. So I would appreciate your consideration. I think you'd be great. Do we have... Actually, did the supervisor's office ever get here?
He did not.
Okay, I'm going to guess we may not get him to... Yeah, the city engineer should be here by now, I hope. Michael Winters? Okay. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yep. No, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the Seismic Safety Commission for putting this together. Just to clarify, I'm an engineer for the city, not the city engineer.
Now you are.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to briefly talk on the overall damages to our infrastructure on behalf of our Public Works Department. So beginning with streets, we observed that multiple types of cracking were accelerated throughout town, including block, transverse, and reflective cracking. There were sizable pre-existing cracks on some of our major streets that had previously been treated that continued to open up even further with the fill material being unable to compensate for the extent of the movement that took place. Following the July 5th earthquake, city staff was up late into the night, driving all around town, canvassing streets, and ensuring that there were no imminent safety hazards. So overall, we did not experience any ultimate failures relative to streets. With that being said, preliminary estimates put damages to streets approximately upward of $500,000. Moving on to another aspect of our infrastructure, sidewalks. We regularly experience a condition out here where we get sidewalk buckles due to the temperature cycles out here in the desert. These conditions were only further propagated by the events as numerous new cases developed. We anticipate that there may be latent defects that continue to present themselves for the months and years to come, with the concern being that during the movement, many concrete joints of sidewalks and driveways and the like will have ultimately been compromised and further subject to displacement down the road. We're going to continue to monitor these cases to see if there is a trend upward, and if you are interested in any of this data down the road, you could always let us know. So lastly, as part of Public Works, there's the wastewater treatment facility. I don't know if anyone else has spoken on that today, but I'll touch on that a little bit. The July 4th earthquake caused minimal damage, temporarily knocking out power and water to the facility. However, thanks to an emergency generator, the plant was able to stay operational. But the July 5th earthquake had other things in mind. Again, it knocked out power and water to the facility and disabled one of the primary clarifiers. The flight mechanism for the primary clarifier lost its alignment and got wrapped up around the drive shaft and effectively just destroyed the mechanism. There were also multiple breaks discovered in multiple water lines servicing the facility, including a 2-inch main line servicing the north end. Control panels throughout were shorting out, and while they were getting these issues identified, they had no choice but to shut down the emergency generator, which left the plant effectively non-operational. So then it was on to trying to make contact with proper Navy personnel to try and get assistance. So once they communicated the situation to the Navy ultimately deemed the condition critical, and they began providing crews to get the plant back up and running. Just want to note there that the facility staff of the wastewater plant is extremely grateful to those crews that responded during that time. As of today, the water main that was compromised has been replaced, and all the stages of the plant have been inspected and tested, and they are back up to 100% operation. As for the gravity sewer line system throughout town, we have not completed a full video evaluation, so we're hesitant to say that there still may be lingering effects that have not been discovered. So that is something we are working on. As for myself, I was primarily part of the team that was assembled to coordinate structural inspections for homes and businesses, and I'd also like to take a moment to thank that team. We still have volunteers helping to this day. As the mayor touched on, there's still a lot of people concerned about staying in their home, and we are still trying to put some of those concerns to rest. As for lessons learned, all I can really say is that most people don't expect to go through these experiences, so I cannot stress enough the importance of, as the mayor was speaking about having an emergency response plan and being familiar with the resources and contacts that are going to be necessary both internally for emergency response, but also gathering and streamlining information for the public's use and for the public's aid. So I think it's important, no matter how chaotic events may seem in the early stages, to stay calm and collected, and take a moment to delegate responsibilities and establish that chain of command and make sure that all information is kind of streamlined and accessible for everyone. So yeah, that's really all I've got. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there questions for Mr. Winters? Commissioner Marvelli.
Hi there. A quick question for you. In terms of the building stock, the commercial building stock, Are there any buildings that are still non-occupiable at this point?
Yes, and I'd say there's a good amount of commercial buildings that are still red tag at this point, and I guess that's really up to the owner and their process of contacting and whoever they would need to proceed with repairs. So yeah, there are still businesses that are impacted currently.
Okay. Which translates to income for folks and.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
One question for you was, were you, I'm curious what your team was that provided the structural assessments of your structures, your commercial and your residential structures.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to reach out with OES and bring in assessment personnel, or
Not
did you do it all
exactly.
internally?
Not exactly through OES, but it was through our mutual aid program. We had several building inspectors as well as volunteers from different agencies coming together from all over and really helping us out. And we can't thank them enough for the time they were here.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other
Just
questions?
Just a quick question. You mentioned $500,000, I think, for costs to repair the roads. Did I hear that right? Or?
That was only relative to the cracks, I believe.
Oh, okay. So do you have a sense how much it costs for the wastewater plant?
For the wastewater facility, I've not been appraised of those costs, so I wouldn't want to throw out a
Okay,
ballpark estimate.
fair, because I was thinking of the FEMA threshold that was mentioned earlier. So,
Yeah.
and a similar question following up. Do you have statistics on sort of basic numbers in terms of type of buildings, number of damages that you have done so far?
Absolutely, yeah. We've kept a log of everything that's come through our hotline, and we have quite a small team that's now, as resources have kind of dispersed, we have kind of a smaller team that's managing that now, and we are doing the best we can to keep updating each case as they are addressed, as far as red tags and yellow tags and things like that.
Okay. I'm looking at Dick over there, but it would be great to get some of that information. So
Okay.
it'll be-
And I know I have Selena's contact information. Would she be the contact to send anything to?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, on to buildings and structures. We have Dr. Ostash, Superintendent Sierra Sands Unified School District, I think. Yes, excellent. And Jim Suver, CEO and President of the Ridgecrest Hospital, is also listed here.
Mr. Suber's here, let's see, Dr. Ostash.
I'll start and then stop when broadcast comes.
Yeah.
Anyway, as Mayor Reedon said, thank you for coming to Ridgecrest, and thank you for allowing us to present. I am the CEO of the hospital. We did survive. We were closed for roughly 2 days, but we kept providing care, albeit outside, due to the extraordinary efforts of our staff and providers. We had OB patients coming in. We had a few accidents coming in, and the normal things that you would normally have any time that we were open. I also want to note while I'm up here the support of our city mayor, city manager, and the chief of police for their great efforts as well. We felt very, very supported. I am beginning to feel somewhat persecuted. This is my third earthquake in my life. I had Oroville as a kid, San Francisco in the late 80s, and now Ridgecrest, and I have to think that maybe I brought it here. But each time I learn a little bit more. So roughly, our hospital has 296,000 square feet on 38 acres. 50,000 square feet was significantly impacted by the seismic events. The cost to us for the seismic thing, and this includes lost revenue and repairs as well, is in excess of $2.6 million. We could not afford earthquake insurance because frankly, that's all we would be doing is paying the earthquake insurance with a very high deductible. So we are going to be taking our reserves to rebuild the hospital and absorb the lost revenue. We did lose our seismically approved SB 1953 main patient care tower, which we opened in 2010 during the earthquake. The good news is the building wiggled from side to side and bounced up and down exactly how it was supposed to do in an earthquake. The sad thing is all the plumbing that did the chilled and the heated water that we used to cool and heat the building did not move with the building and snapped. And we had lots and lots of water. An elevator shaft filled. We lost our operating rooms when the water from the second floor came down to the first floor. And we are, even though the building code at the time in 2010 allowed for rigid connection, we are, before we relocate the tower, making all those rigid connections flexible connections so that we don't have a repeat of this if we have another bump or two. We want to have an abundance of caution. We're hoping to be back in our patient care tower by the end of the month. In addition to the water damage, we had a lot of sheetrock seams bust on us, which is to be expected. The problem in a hospital is an infection control risk, so that also limited our ability to use portions of the building until those were patched. My poor maintenance staff had the privilege of fixing the seam bust twice. They immediately went in after the first earthquake to make sure we could get ready, and then as soon as the joint compound set, we had the second earthquake, and they got to do it all again. But a great team effort there. We are very, very fortunate for our community that we had our unscathed 1960s compliant buildings that the state allowed us to reopen, and that's where our inpatients are now in the 1960s buildings because they did not suffer a crack at all. And that's probably a whole different conversation, but we were fortunate that we had the capacity. Other than that, we still would have been closed to do that. I think the other thing that was a challenge for us is cooling for both our emergency room as well as our skilled nursing patients. We don't have the emergency power capability to have everything on emergency power, and so after the second earthquake, when we did lose power, we did have about 70 nursing home residents that we thought we may have to evacuate to, which would have been quite a challenge, one for transportation, and secondarily, no one within 2 hours had the capacity or the staff to have taken them. Fortunately, with a call to my counterparts, SCE made us a priority, and we got the lineup, and we were able to restore cooling to the building. I think the other thing that we've done for the future is our board did approve us to buy several large air-conditioned tents. We had a great disaster thing that has been funded to us over the years, and we had the tents and set up. The challenge we have in Ridgecrest, of course, is heat, and you may be operationally, but inside those tents, it was getting pretty hot. So we are hoping to have these diesel-fired, air-cooled tents any month now. I would tell you, if there's any lesson that I've learned about this, is for healthcare, we can't be over-reliant on our buildings, because I think I've fixed the pipe problem now, but in another earthquake, I don't know what may also happen, and the fact the building is standing is great. Having gone through the San Francisco earthquake and having the facades of the hospital I was working at falling in around me, I'm very, very appreciative of that. But to provide patient care, we need a whole bunch of things. We need water, sewer, the ability to cool, sound infection control, and really my focus is, yes, it's important about the buildings, but it's also more important that we have provision for providing healthcare services, and whether that's mobile hospitals that can be airdropped in or things like that, I'm really rethinking that. I would also want to add on to Mayor Braden's comment, and I hope this is not necessarily for a newspaper publication, but I can tell you in the 4 weeks after the earthquake, the amount of sedatives that our doctors were writing were up 400%. It was really the mental health of the organization. We have actually had 2 of our managers actually leave the state and say they can't stand the fear of being here. And I never really had thought about it, having been a California boy, and earthquakes are part of it. But the mental health needs both of our staff and the first responders, as well as the community, has really taken a toll. And we're hoping that we're on our way back. But again, great response from the city of Ridgecrest on this. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there questions? Commissioner Marvelli.
Hi. Quick question. I'm curious, have you spoken with the folks up at Oshpod about the performance of the building, the resiliency, and then the outcome?
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, Oshpod sent down 7 of their think tank engineers to look at the building right after the second earthquake and to analyze it. So we are in discussions with them. I believe that Oshpod believes that had the earthquake just been a little bit different, that maybe the 1960s buildings would have collapsed. It's becoming a lot of, what if to do that. So we're in discussions with them, and we've had a number of our own seismic engineers out that came out right after the first earthquake and then came out again after the second earthquake to look to see at the damage to see if we can figure out what beams snapped. We did have some structure flex beams that appropriately snapped, but what can be done differently. And so this is a great learning experience for them, as well as maybe for hospital construction. I believe UC Irvine's engineering school is also using us as a test case for building design.
And I'm just curious, the second question is, I believe it's every other month they have a hospital safety board meeting, and one of my staff members attends that. I don't know if you've been asked to speak by chance?
Not yet, but we are in discussions with them as well. And Oshpod was very accommodating to us. I will say everyone in Sacramento was very, very supportive of our efforts and got us what we need. But thank you for that, and I will maybe suggest that I get an invitation.
Yeah. It helps to hear from folks that are actually going through it rather than I'm on the code side. So we write the code, but we need to know how it's used and how it works and how it doesn't work. And
Thank you very much for that
firsthand.
suggestion.
Sure. Thank you for your hard work.
Yeah, actually, I have just a couple of technical questions from a standpoint of when I drove down the main boulevard and saw the hospital. By the tower, you're talking about the high-rise building that parallels the street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you speak to what kind of drifts or what kind of displacements the building actually experienced?
Because the duration of the earthquake was relatively short, it would be very hard to predict. I can tell you most walls popped the sheetrock seam. Virtually every wall in the new tower popped a sheetrock seam.
Wow.
Where everything was. But in terms of noticing anything that would tell me the building has skewed or something like that, no. There was a beam on the penthouse where the mechanical equipment is that did get sheared off right at the weld. And so that would have been the equivalent of the third story, and I would anticipate that had the bulk of the shift on that, and do that. Which, when it snapped, it also broke a whole bunch of other pipes as well to do that. But the engineers couldn't find anything where any of the buildings have really shifted off. I can tell you that we've had some where the older buildings and new buildings have joined, where the sheet vinyl has popped up because the buildings have moved a little bit. Before that. But other than that, we actually, the building structure itself, I think, did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, it was just rigid enough.
Yes.
Those walls were rigid enough to
And our 1960s buildings are largely preformed concrete walls with every patient room as its own concrete, and I suspect that's pretty tough. I know that apparently when they tore down one of the old hospital wings to build the new wing, the building did not want to come down gracefully and took a lot of wrecking balls, which tells me that those structures are pretty tough.
Pretty solid. Okay. Thank you.
No, thanks.
I think that's it. Thank you, sir. Did Dr. Ostash arrive? Okay. Do you have a feel for how quickly he may be here? Okay. Why don't we wait for him then rather than go on to the next person? But just so we are aware, is Bernie Mondragon with us yet from the chamber? Okay. get a short, quick break. Good. If she's ready. He's just walked in the door, Lynn. Hi. Dr. Ostesh, thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Good afternoon. Afternoon. We're basically looking for what you can tell us about how your buildings did and how things in general went, within your jurisdiction. What was good, what was maybe not so good, what ought to perhaps be done differently to avoid problems in futures, and what things were really good that you'd like to brag about for others to learn from.
Absolutely. First of all, I invite you, as I move along, to please pause and ask questions and point me in a different direction if it'd be more helpful for you. And I believe I have about 15 minutes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, our schools, we have 10 schools in our district. We serve a little over 5,000 students. And we have a range of age of facilities from the 40s to literally one that just was completed a year or so ago. And as one would assume, the brand new school, which is known as Murray Middle School, fared perfectly. It achieved 100% out of 100%, no recovery needed. It served as a wonderful community asset for all of our services that came to our aid in town. We had the World Central Kitchen, which served many thousands of meals to the community, operating out of our Murray Middle School kitchen. We had the American Red Cross create a significant camp there. I don't know if it was to the exclusion of other facilities, but I know that we had our entire gym at Murray Middle School is filled with first aid, American Red Cross responders, and even a number of office setups were put in the classrooms. We had Team Rubicon intend to come, but then by the time that they were going to deploy here, it was determined that their services weren't necessarily needed, that there were enough other services. But suffice it to say that Murray Middle School was a great community asset, and we were able to host anyone who wanted to provide benevolent services to the community. We hosted them. The opposite end, one of our oldest schools, Richmond Elementary School, which serves students on base, no longer. That school suffered the most severe damage. We estimated approximately $3 million or more worth of damage. And considering we have already been approved for an 80% funding grant to build a new Richmond from the Office of Economic Adjustment, a federal agency utilizing these DOD monies, and seeing that we had already committed to demolishing this school when we complete the new school in the next few years, we felt like we'd be misguiding taxpayer funds by dumping $3 million in a facility that we've already promised on paper to demolish. So we moved that school, which is between 400 and 450 students. We moved that school to Vieweg Elementary School, Vieweg, kind of a sister school to Richmond, built around the same time, but I don't know, it's kind of inexplicable. I don't know if because the Richmond school is closer to the fault. I don't know if, I'm not an expert in there. I don't know if the ground upon which Richmond sits is less stable and more vulnerable to earthquake. The Vieweg campus did not suffer as much damage. So we were able to invest, to date, we've invested about $2.5 million of recovery work at Vieweg, but we will not be demolishing that school. And so the investment of taxpayer dollars will be carrying forward in the coming decades. We did have to postpone the start of school at that Vieweg site by 1 week. But through exigent circumstances and Cal OES and all of their incredible support, we were able to, within a matter of about 6 or 7 weeks, completely repair and then make the school suitable for students. The only other area that I would comment on is that we had Gateway Elementary School, which previous to Murray Middle School being built a couple years ago was our newest school, built in the 80s, the mid-80s. It also, from a structural point of view, did beautifully, no problem. However, if you hadn't already heard, we had been, it's kind of a running joke, it's a Murphy's Law situation. We had been wanting to do a carpet install in that school for the last decade. We had been noticing the need with some seams and some wear and tear in our, quote, new school, end quote, really wasn't as new as we thought it was, and we needed new carpet. And so we finally budgeted that project to take place, and so we did at Gateway Elementary School what you would do in your home if you're having the entire floor redone. You'd move all of your furniture, all of your belongings, and we put it all in the cafeteria. Well, the July 5, the big earthquake, the biggest one, broke right in the center of the cafeteria, broke a large, highly charged fire extinguisher pipe. And it flooded all of our desks and curriculum, supplementary materials, office furniture, you name it. All of our assets were gone. So ironically, a school that actually fared really well incurred a pretty significant damage of, what would you call non-structural issues, but the replacement, insurance replacement of desks and chairs, et cetera. That's really a 20,000-foot level view of what happened. All of the other 8 sites did fairly well. I would mention one other thing. The district does own what we call the Sierra Vista Educational Center, and it's a commercial building that houses an Albertsons on the commercial side, and then we have the educational side that we use for district services like counseling, school psychology, variety of other departments and services. The educational side, the district had bonding capacity to significantly improve it over the last 10 years, and it had been reinforced, and it was prepared and was ready for an earthquake. It did fine. The commercial side is not modernized, so that side we have some red tag areas, and we have some businesses who have been displaced, and we intend to fix it and get them back into their spaces in the next 3 to 8 months. I don't know exactly. But I would pause and ask what points of interest you might have.
Thank you. I have one question. We've seen instances in schools, as you know better than most, school buildings are built to a higher standard than most other buildings, precisely to keep them safer for our children. But oftentimes, especially in very busy schools, things don't get anchored to the walls that maybe should. So you get bookcases and file cabinets and things like that that overturn, which are a mess. They can hurt somebody if they fall on them, but probably most importantly, if you're trying to evacuate and they're in the way, they prevent that. Was that something that was an issue for you, or is that something your district was on top of and didn't have that issue?
That's a great point. You're right. Schools are subject to the Field Act and have significant seismic qualifications. So structurally, we're in pretty good shape, especially if schools have been modernized or built after the late 70s. You're right. Dr. Lucy Jones in Pasadena would say you should go on a hazard hunt in your homes and in your schools, and you should identify those hazards that would hurt or really hurt you. And I will freely acknowledge that if these earthquakes had occurred during school, I would project that we would have had a number of injuries, most of which I would suggest would be mild, but some of them could have been moderate, and some of them could have been pretty bad. At Richmond School, the one that we shut down and had the most damage, I walked through the facility, and we have, in that facility, we have a specialized facility called the Annex, where we host some of our most severely disabled children. And so we have lots of specialized equipment, lots of specialized storage and such. And there were some very heavy items that through the shaking, you get some of those drawers that come out, and then all of a sudden they tip over, and it was really bad. There were a number of items that were not anchored to the wall, cabinets, bookshelves, et cetera. And so that's something we really need to identify, both, what does the law say about it, but more than that, what should we do? When I will tell you this, when we got our new equipment delivered to Gateway, I was personally involved in observing and helping, and I saw a lot of those bookshelves being anchored to the wall that previously were not. So we are going through, I would say, an informal effort as of now, but I think you're hitting on a really relevant point for probably all schools in the 1,000 school
Yes.
districts in the state.
Well, and honestly, not just schools. Schools are more vulnerable because they're full of kids. But offices, houses, most buildings have tall things against walls, and in far too many instances, they're not attached to the walls and they will fall over.
Another anecdotal piece of evidence, I walked through our business office that has very heavy file cabinets. They actually had the safety devices that prevent one drawer or not more than one drawer from opening. Some of those safety devices actually failed because of the rigor of the shaking, and we had to replace some of them because they fell over and they bent structurally, and we could not repair them. So it was a pretty violent shaking in many of our facilities.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Yep. You raise a really interesting issue, which is you have the structural issues, but then the internal issues. Do you get recommendations from the State Department of Schools, Education Department as to what to do in an earthquake, what preventive steps, the top 10 things to do to protect the kids?
That's a great question. My best answer is I would say that the most prominent advice and guidance that we get is basically how to respond in the event of an earthquake, which of course is the cover, get under the desk, evacuate if need be. If you're going to evacuate, look for overhead power lines, et cetera, et cetera. But there isn't really, I'm not aware of any particular law that requires how you bolt things down or what have you. We have our regular fire marshal inspections, but they're mostly focused on fire implication, not earthquake. So I don't have a great answer for that.
All right, thank you.
I thought where you're going with internal was there was also another implication the earthquakes had, which was the mental impact, the spiritual impact of our students and our staff. We really staffed up our counseling, and we reached out to the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office, who deployed additional counselors and mental health therapists and whatever we needed, because that was actually a big impact. It still is.
Thank you.
So I'm Jim Hackett. I'm with the
Sir.
State Architect's Office. And a lot of the individuals that came out of our Southern California, our Los Angeles office to inspect your schools, one in particular, great guy, actually went to Buick Elementary School back when it was...
Buick Elementary.
Yeah, exactly, before it actually had been decommissioned, and now it's back.
Yes.
Being back. So he was very, very excited to come back and help and assist. And I know that we were involved in looking at all of your schools as well as Saracoso up on the hill. I've seen a lot of the pictures of the damage that occurred, and there was ceiling damage in some of your schools, which most of these ceilings have either been re-stiffened or at some point in time or replaced. Generally, the newer ceilings worked fairly well from what I saw in the pictures. Can you confirm that?
I can absolutely confirm that. Where we have new install or modernized, for what you're talking about, the T-bar ceilings, and I'm aware, I became more knowledgeable a lot of the stuff than I was prior to July 4th, believe me. Where we have not modernized, you have just the vertical hanging supports, and then with the new ones, you have a lot of the 45-degree anchoring and
Correct.
every however many square feet. And where we have the new or modernized, we really had, I would say, almost no damage on T-bar ceiling. But like Richmond School, I would say, at least half of the T-bar ceiling was completely destroyed. I mean, and that which remained intact, that looks to me like a form of T-bar ceiling, different than what we have, but it looks like a T-bar ceiling. But that which was remaining was really not intact, really. But then you go to Burroughs High School, where we had a $30+ million remodel and all new T-bar. It was all fine. Murray Middle School, all fine. So, to your point, I can absolutely validate that the to modern code T-bar ceiling did just fine.
That's really important to hear, because we continue to try and make improvements, and we continue to see in earthquakes failures with ceilings or damage that occurs with ceilings. So to know that they were properly installed, they performed well, because you sustained quite a bit of shaking.
We did.
The Richmond school is on a sandier base, which, if you can recall back to Mexico City, I mean, they almost lost half of the city. Even had tall buildings tipping over as the sands tended to shake and to settle. So a sandy base type of a soil and a campus like that will definitely experience significantly more movement. And I'm guessing that's what happened at the Richmond School. Buick is actually on firmer soil.
Yes.
And so you had a different kind of shaking that occurred at Buick, and that's probably why you had such different.
And to your point, another thing that we learned subsequent to the initial inspections with DSA inspectors, Cal OES inspectors, FEMA inspectors, we learned after we let a contract to check our sewers below our schools, Richmond School had a significant fail. So had we decided, well, let's put the money into it, fix it, whatever, I don't think that was really a good choice if we had done that. But had we done that, we would have then hit a real dead end, because when you have massive sewer failure, then the cost for fixing just skyrockets. So we were really validated when we found out that, so that shows that the soil, because we did not have the sewer failure at the Buick campus, but we have massive sewer failure at Richmond.
Just be assured, anything you need from our office to help accelerate the process through our office to get you back up and running.
Thank you. And you have been. Under the exigent circumstances, we couldn't have asked for better support from your agency or any other agency of getting work done. And now we're going through the ordinary procurement process, which is competitive bid, and that'll be a whole different ballgame. But but that's okay. I get it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, sir.
You're most welcome.
We are on to businesses. Is Bernie Mondragon here yet?
Oh, I'm here to speak for the
You are here for the chamber?
Yes.
You are now Bernie Mondragon.
My name is Tim Smith.
Come on up, Mr. Smith. Thank you.
I want to see three people all claiming to be.
Well, the real Bernie Mondragon.
Bernie Mondragon is our chairman of the board for the Chamber of Commerce, and he was unable to make it today because of his regular work obligations. He's a local landscaper here in town. So in regards to the earthquake that took place, the two of them, and the response and how it impacted the businesses, immediately, as I'm sure you've heard, is that many of them were shut down and closed, at least through that weekend. Many of them, because it happened on the weekend or happened on the holiday, many of them were closed just due to the holiday, which in many ways was a blessing. I'm not sure if throughout today, if you've had the opportunity to hear about some of the businesses like our local theater, who experienced the wall shaking and the joists actually collapsing and the whole roof coming down on Theater 1. But because it was on the holiday, and the first one was early, it wasn't full yet. They just had one or two employees in the building, and it wasn't affected. The next night, on the 5th, on the 7.1, had that happened without the precursor, and that's when the ceiling came down, the roof came down. If that had happened that night, it was scheduled to have an opening night movie, and I just talked to Kelly this afternoon, and she said they were scheduled to have a horror film on a Friday night, and that it would have been packed. So to have the ceiling come down, the roof literally fall down, it would have been a totally different story for Ridgecrest holistically. But by and far, they were the ones that our theater was the one who experienced the most damage, as I'm sure you're aware. It was really remarkable to hear the stories about how our members and how the businesses rallied together and supported each other. I was talking with Daryl Silverberg, who's a past chairman of our board, and he runs the IWV insurance. And he talked about how even that immediate day that he had a competitor in the insurance business who was coming around and helping and rallying people around to make sure people were okay. And it was really incredible to see that kind of unity across our community and the businesses reacting and responding to the needs. some of the needs were, it was really incredible to see some of the grocery stores and how quickly our Stater Brothers especially was able to get back up after the first earthquake on the 4th. And then they had the next one the next day, and then they were still able to turn around and get back open by Sunday, which is really incredible when they had all of their shelves emptied to be able to turn around. I think what's most incredible about that is that there were employees that were here in town still to help in that recovery. I know we heard a lot from businesses and from neighbors who, because of the trauma, just got up and left Ridgecrest, right? They needed to get out of the shaking and find stable ground for themselves and for their kids. And many of the employees just had to leave town to find some peace. And so it was incredible to hear some of the stories of people going around and helping, as well as those that had businesses that had their employees that were able and willing to stick around and help get back ready to serve the community. I don't know. Any questions? I don't have a ton. Wasn't given a ton of direction on what to share. But
Okay. No, actually, that's very helpful. Do you have at this point businesses that are looking for a place to reopen because their building is not habitable and won't be soon enough?
the one that really stands out is actually our local bowling alley. They experienced enough rippling on their lanes that they are unable to reopen because of the damage to the lanes. And from what I understand is that they're not looking, it's just too cost prohibitive to do all the work that would be required to have them open. I think by the grace of God that there wasn't the kind of damage that there was maybe on base in town. And so many of the businesses were out only a handful of days, some of them a few weeks. One of the Albertsons, we have two Albertsons grocery stores, and one of them was closed maybe 2 weeks before they were open. Maybe it was just a week and a half. That first week was kind of a blur, so it's kind of hard to remember. But they were able to open, and they opened limited hours at the beginning as they were still getting things back together. But I haven't heard very many that the buildings were damaged beyond them being able to open back up. Some of it was just needing to put their things back on the shelves and gather their emotional stability to be able to open back up.
The reason I asked is I have seen instances where a Chamber of Commerce became kind of a clearinghouse. A business that needed space would essentially post at the chamber, I need 2 rooms, this many square feet, and a desk. And somebody would say, I have that.
Yeah.
And it was really very effective and helped particularly the small business community. And that was some time ago, before much of the electronic communication capability we have now, but they literally had a bulletin board in the chamber office, and one side was I want A, and one side was I have this. And they matched people up, and it was great for local business.
Yeah, we didn't have that need in Ridgecrest, not immediately, and it hasn't really been something that we've followed up with perhaps because of what you just described of the way Facebook functions in Ridgecrest particularly, and how word got out of people responding, I'm okay, or I need this, or different pieces. So we didn't have a ton of that. What we did have was a lot of the chamber functioned as a place where I think a number of outside resources came to check in with us, and for us to be able to point them to where businesses and where resources in Ridgecrest were located and how to connect with them. So we became a very small hub for distributing them back out to the greater portion of Ridgecrest, right? So we saw SBA. They came in the same day that they came in to meet with the city. They came straight to the chamber as well. We had the same with the Red Cross when they were trying to inquire about where to park their trucks and where to be able to set up their facilities for distributing their equipment. So they came to us, and we were able then to brainstorm quickly and make some phone calls, and they landed at the the school district has some space. So that is kind of how, in this instance, the chamber functioned as that point of contact for the resources who are coming in and trying to locate where they can best be serving.
It's great. And then last question for me is, did the chamber see, or have your members talked about things that were a problem for them in recovery in terms of regulation or inspection or things that government does or doesn't do as well as they might like?
That's probably been the biggest thing that we've heard, is the frustrations of not knowing who or how to report, and the immediate first response of having multiple inspectors coming out to look at facilities, but them not connecting and actually not been reporting back to one centralized location to say that building has been checked. I've heard stories, multiple stories, about a business having 3-4 inspectors coming out, and they're like, but we just had you here, and they're like, it's not on my list. And then, so there was just not a straightforward point of contact where everybody was going back and going, okay, this is who has been checked. We spoke with the Salvation Army here in town and the major there, and she shared that after the July 4th event, somebody came out and checked the facility and said, okay, this portion of your building doesn't look safe. Why don't you not use this and just use this other 2/3? And then the next day was the bigger one, and nobody from that guy or nobody from that same department came back out to check on them to see, well, did it get worse because that was a bigger earthquake, or any of those pieces. So there are things like that where it just, people felt like they got dropped in the communications and they didn't know who or how or where to actually communicate that.
Yeah, I think communication is often an issue, just not just between the entities that are working on one side, but between those entities and the residents, the businesses that they are working with. And it's understandable to some extent, because when you get an event like this, building department doesn't have enough inspectors of their own, so they import some, and everybody does things a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. But I think that is something that we can all take that lesson and try to focus on that the next time we have something like this. Improve that communication, keep a better list, and as best you can, standardize how inspections are done, so you don't have one inspector who comes in and says it's all good, and then another one comes around and says, oh no, that's a problem, which maybe the second one found something that was dangerous, but it's still very frustrating to whoever is being inspected because they thought they were fine. Yeah. They were told they were fine. So great, thank you very much. Any other questions?
So I just noticed that I was supposed to speak directly to it at mouth level, so I did not ever do that. And I apologize.
We heard you. Hopefully it recorded well.
Well, my name is Tim Smith, and I'm the executive director over at the Chamber, so that's why I came in.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Is Mr. Munoz from San Bernardino County here? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Daniel Munoz, San Bernardino County Office of Emergency Services. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys today. I think a lot of my comments really are going to echo a lot of the things that I've heard today from both the fire chief from Kern County, but also the comments from the mayor and a bunch of other individuals here. I think that there's a lot of commonalities when we talk about response to these types of events. I'm going to focus my comments particularly on my area of expertise, which is the Emergency Operations Center and emergency management. So the instructions I received was just kind of casually discuss the events as they unfolded from our perspective and my discipline. So like everyone else has said, obviously, after the initial quake on July 4th, we knew intuitively that there was probably going to be some damage up in the area of Trona. And once we explained to everybody where Trona was at, we moved forward with that. So initially, we activated our Emergency Operations Center on July 4th after the initial earthquake. So our primary goal at that point really was just to try to start working on damage assessments so that we can submit our initial damage estimates, which is a standard process to Cal OES. So we were working on that, came back Friday, and we're working with our Public Works Department, our Special Districts, and our Land Use Department so that we can coordinate a team of damage assessment folks to come down to Trona on Saturday was the initial plan. So we could start completing our IDEs. And as mentioned by everyone else, then the big quake struck on Friday. And so I'll never forget that day because I was watching the Dodgers lose to the Padres. It was a close game, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I was just about to open up a beer, and I said, whoa, yep, that's another big earthquake. And so we were back at our EOC. We left Friday at 6 p.m. We were back there probably before 8. We knew at that point that there was going to be significant resources that were going to be needed without having necessarily know what the damage was going to be. Just from a common sense perspective, we knew that we had a population, while not large, we knew it was a underprivileged, underserved population, so we knew that there was going to be immediate needs. At about 1 o'clock in the morning that Friday, our chief executive officer was at our EOC to sign our local proclamation. So I went home that Friday probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, came back Saturday morning probably about 9:30, and started making calls to all of our county department heads. Just basically quick 30-second calls. Hey, I don't know if you're in town, but we had an earthquake. It affected our folks in Trona, and we're going to need your help. So I think to echo the comments made by the mayor, our county departments is the same way. It's like, what do you need? That's fine, no issues. So we're proud to say that by Saturday, probably around noon or about 1, we had the initial makings of standing up our commodity points of distribution at the Trona High School. So at that point, we were distributing water, Gatorade, MREs, ice, buckets, empty buckets for people to use potable water. Then basically from that point, the response escalated into bringing in portable showers that were ADA accessible, porta potties. I think one of the gaps that we had initially was that because Trona is a small community, our intimate knowledge of the community wasn't great. So we reached out to some of the local nonprofits, mostly the faith-based groups there in Trona, and also working with our first district supervisor. They have field reps that routinely work in the area. So we were able to connect with them at some point throughout that initial weekend to figure out, okay, who are the primary stakeholders there in the community? Who are the people that have a voice? Who are the people that know the needs and can help identify those gaps? And so through that process, we opened up our local assistance center the following Wednesday. And we had that operation up and running probably for about a week and a half. And then we've transitioned into a recovery center where we continue to provide services. So just to give you some context in terms of the manpower and the personnel involved in the effort, our Emergency Operations Center had about an average about 50 personnel since Friday, the day of the big quake, through probably, I would say, July 18th or 19th, when we kind of scaled down a little bit. And then our field personnel in Trona was probably upwards of 100 people just to help set up the CPOD, the Local Assistance Center, and the Recovery Center. Challenges faced, basic stuff. Trona is about 130 miles away from the county seat. We have a secondary EOC up in the high desert, but that's still quite a fair distance away. The county does have some existing infrastructure and some services that are provided out of Trona. We have a library, and then we also operate some weekly health and human services departments operate out of a leased facility there. And then we also contract to provide senior nutrition services, and so we're linked in with the senior center there. But just trying to, on a holiday weekend, as others have mentioned already, trying to work through our call down list to find personnel, to stage, to logistically transport all those resources that were needed in a short period of time, and hopefully not forget something, because you can't come back and readily pick it up, was a tremendous effort. And the county of San Bernardino has about 46 departments, about 23,000 employees, and this was one of those situations where we intuitively knew that this is an all hands on deck situation. So for us, really the response, it didn't begin on July 4th or July 5th. Really, our response began almost, honestly, about a decade ago. And that's through the trial and through the process of trial and of learning through previous mistakes of other incidents. So our county has experienced a lot of emergencies over the years, both man-made and natural. And so I think that there's a new culture that was bred there in the county starting probably about 10, 12 years ago. And that is we're very focused on safety and disaster preparedness. And so we have executive leadership and our electeds as well that are very supportive of anything that has to do with becoming prepared, running exercises, not just developing plans and putting them on a shelf, but physically conducting exercises and drills and things of that nature. So those are the types of things that I wanted to share, because those are the types of things that play dividends when something does happen. So I think that our county was well positioned. We had a lot of the key ingredients that I hear that Ridgecrest and Kern County has, which is preparedness efforts, documents, planning documents, exercising, training, and obviously leadership's important. So I think that our county, as well as far as I see with all the comments here today, Kern County and the city of Ridgecrest, I think if you put all those things together, you're never going to have a perfect response, but I think it helps to mitigate a lot of the minor issues. And one of the big things is that the thing that it helps to alleviate and just kind of streamline things is that it opens up the lines of just communication and cooperation, and so that's huge. I know that Cal OES was at our EOC probably Friday, July. Yeah, from Friday all the way on till, 2 or 3 weeks after that. We've had representatives from California National Guard, law enforcement, fire, EMS, just about every single county department. So it was a large effort. I think one of the things that a good takeaway for us, and something that was discussed earlier and brought up already, but it kind of became a reality for us and could maybe be used as a learning lesson for others, is that there's always going to be struggles when, I think that logistically getting supplies into, predetermined areas is one thing, and that's very doable. But I think the challenge that we found was just making the delivery in terms of that last mile. So we were able to set up our point of distribution center and have supplies there and have the local assistance center for services. But even though we were dealing with the small population base, we were dealing with a lot of folks that were either elderly or might have some type of disability, or maybe they were just disadvantaged to the point where they don't have a vehicle. What I came to learn was that the primary mode of transportation for most folks in Trona was walking, and typically walking once the sun started to come down because it was so hot. And so we had to make adjustments on the fly to, accommodate those needs. So we set up a cooling center at our library, even though it was impacted. The department did a great job of bringing up employees and making sure that that facility was up and running and able to serve as a cooling center. We shifted our hours around a couple different times to try to accommodate the needs of the public. We kind of created our own on-the-fly Uber system, utilizing just county vehicles, utilizing anybody from our behavioral health employees to our probation staff, any staff really that was available with the appropriate vehicles, where we would just take calls, we would make deliveries, we would transport families from their homes to the local assistance center. The Victor Valley Transit folks were gracious enough to assist us with transporting folks from Trona to the shelter here in Ridgecrest, which, by the way, very, very helpful. Thank goodness for that the city of Ridgecrest was able to set up a shelter, because that would have probably been a significant challenge for us to do, given that the infrastructure in Trona is limited to begin with. So it's not like we have a lot of facilities to choose from. Basically, the high school was the only suitable place, and unfortunately, that facility has sustained quite a bit of damage. But fortunately, we were able to utilize the gym area for most of our services. So I think those are some of the takeaways. The other thing that was a little bit unique here was that the water situation. Private supplier of water. Anytime you have an event like this, utilities are always one of the first things that you want to get back up to try to get back to that new normal, whatever that's going to look like. So for us, it was a bit of a challenge. I know there was a loud round of applause in the EOC when we finally got confirmation that the water was on and it was working and the pressure was sustaining, and not only on, but that it was potable and people can actually use it to bathe and drink and that kind of stuff. So, I think that's just something for hopefully this group to take back and take into consideration that those basic lifeline things like water, power, gas, if they're down, the effort to transport and bring those to the community takes a significant energy and a lot of effort. And the other thing for us too was that, as a county, we're also victims. So if we had employees that work and live in the city of Trona and that have operations there, they were impacted as well. So we had to look out for their own behavioral health needs as well. So I think that was probably one of the most utilized services that we offered was our behavioral health services and our Department of Aging making wellness checks for the elderly and those that have access and functional needs. With that, I'll cut it there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on any questions that you folks might have.
Thank you. Let me start with a couple of questions. We had a representative from PG&E earlier talking from the gas side because they don't serve electricity here, that's Edison. And one of the things that they said was they felt like they got into the EOC too late. They waited a few days, and they think they would have been more useful, better informed, and better able to help had they gotten in right away. Did you see any issues with getting the right people into your EOC at the time you wanted them there?
No, not at all.
Good.
And the gas side for us wasn't a significant issue. I think
they were working through Kern County's EOC primarily.
I see.
It was just an observation that their representative had was that's a place we think we could have done better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's always important, like I said, our response to it started a long time ago because I think you bring up a good point. And I was talking about it with my carpool partner this morning is the sooner you make those connections, the better. And at an EOC, anybody's always welcome, and anybody, if they're situated there at the EOC, I think one of the big benefits that folks get out of that environment is that they gain situational awareness from cross disciplines. Because oftentimes, incidents, fire, law, EMS, your basic stuff, always super important for life safety. Moving forward from that, there's equally important, if not even greater, more important agencies that play a role. And that's your public utilities, right? your health and human services, your public health, your special districts, your public works departments. So having representatives from all those disciplines in one setting so they can discuss, debate, solve situations together, obviously it makes for a more streamlined approach to...
That's what an EOC is for.
Exactly. Exactly. So what I like to say the EOC is for is we bring process to chaos, is what we do. You know, we bring order to that. And it takes a minute, but usually utilizing standardized practices, it usually comes together well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
So where did you set up the EOC?
Our EOC is located in Rialto, California, and then we have a secondary EOC up in the high desert in the city of Hesperia. So we had a mobile command unit outside of the Trona High School, so we utilize that for our field operations. But our primary hub is our EOC in the city of Rialto.
Okay. That's helpful. Since this is the Seismic Safety Commission, how would people contact your mobile station for structural assessments and just to assure to look at their structures?
Right. So it's a lot of moving pieces going on at once. So typically our fire department, our office of the fire marshal in our county, typically takes the lead in conducting damage assessments. But it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not only made up of fire personnel, it's made up of fire, it's made up of code enforcement, land use people, and even folks from our assessor's office, because they have information for APN, parcel information, valuation of properties, and those types of things. So if you take an approach and you bring all these people together, they can go in and assess not only the damage to a structure, whether it's safe or not to inhabit, but also the monetary loss. And that's important because we want to ship that information over to our friends at Cal OES right away to see if we're going to be eligible for any type of state or federal assistance. So it's a multi-pronged approach, a lot of moving pieces.
And you responded to those who requested service, or did you just do it anyway?
We do it initially without the request from the public. We do that initially for health and safety reasons, and also just to gauge operational assessment of what damage is to the county. We want to do it not only for private, but also for public buildings. So just to know for situational awareness what the issues are in the county. After that process takes place through our 800 number, we were taking calls from residents that maybe were missed. So if they felt that they had maybe perhaps some damage that was caused by the earthquake, they can call in, and then we can send in a damage assessment team to assess their properties as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you,
sir.
very much.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Lynn, are you ready? Excellent.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Lynn Von Koch-Liebert. I am the Deputy Secretary of Housing at the California Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And for those of you who I have not had the chance to meet, that is an agency that has a quite large mandate, everything from housing to professional licensing, but then also our secretary has the Seismic Safety Commission under her purview. So very pleased to see many of you again today, and take the opportunity to give you an update on our campaign, the Outsmart Disaster Campaign. Okay. And just a quick refresher, the campaign is designed to really help businesses, particularly those that are small or mid-sized, think through what investments can they make, how can they be more prepared in the 7 years, the 7 months, the 7 days before a natural disaster, so that they're better able to get back to business faster after a natural disaster. we have been developing this campaign over the last year and a half, and we've been kind of really thinking through how to create messaging, narrative, toolkits, resources that will be helpful to small and mid-sized businesses across the state. And when the Ridgecrest earthquake occurred in July, we saw a explosive explosion on our website and our social media sites. We suddenly had this renewed interest and energy and interest from many people across the state, particularly in Southern California, really trying to think through what can they do to be better prepared and to be able to make sure that their business is well postured to withstand a natural disaster. And not only because of that, but really drawing from that experience of knowing that there were lots of businesses out there that were really interested, particularly in the lived experience and the peer-to-peer information. I was really pleased today to be able to travel down to Ridgecrest, and he just left, but very grateful to Tim Smith for taking the time yesterday and today to meet with me and to give me a really good overview of how businesses fared here in Ridgecrest, how they were affected, and what they're really doing to be able to move through their recovery and kind of make sure that everything gets back to normal. Also had an incredible opportunity today where he introduced me to a number of local business owners where they told me their story and we talked about what they'd experienced, and then they were great sports in that they were willing to go on film and make short video vignettes so that we can add that to the repository of information through the campaign and give a really nice visual for their business peers who are interested in hearing more, learning more, and hopefully taking the next steps themselves to being more prepared to withstand natural disasters. So just a quick status of the campaign. So as you all know, we spent the first part of this campaign really forming partnerships, and the Seismic Safety Commission funded the first wave of the campaign. We did develop a really extensive website at www.outsmartdisaster.com and have built up a repository of tools and checklists and resources that can be helpful to businesses that are working to increase their preparedness. We did launch our first call to action, which is called the Resilient Business Challenge, which I'll talk to in a little bit later. And then as we started to go through 2 and then 3 and then rounds of very, very extensive wildfires throughout the state, we also made the pivot from just earthquake focus to a multi-hazard approach where we expanded the toolkit, we expanded the messaging to encompass floods and fires in addition to just earthquakes. Right now, we're at this very interesting point where we are testing a couple new concepts where we're really focusing on how can we use very clear local networks that are already established to be able to build essentially local ambassadorships to be able to help this campaign begin to have more of a grassroots swell. And we are running a series of pilots, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, include one in Sacramento and one in LA. Just a quick snapshot on the Resilient Business Checklist, because I think this is really where the heart and the meat of the campaign is. We wanted to make this a very low barrier to entry for businesses, really focusing on those that have small staffs that maybe haven't taken these steps into resiliency. So for the initial step, it's five areas of focus. You can see it's know your exposure to natural hazards, identify your supply chain vulnerabilities, strengthen your physical workspace and facilities, and safeguard your data and vital documents, and understanding your insurance and finance. Many of these are concepts that came up in today's discussion today with local business owners and that we've heard through the speakers today as well. The way that the toolkit works is that each of one of these you can drill down in their ideas and things to consider that a business can utilize based off of their risk, their resources, their scale, et cetera, to be able to figure out what would be the right intervention for them. And then behind that, we have curated resources so the businesses that do want to take on for certain steps have access to checklists, to webinars, to all sorts of resources that will help them very independently be able to make these incremental investments in their resiliency. We've been testing this idea of creating local ambassadorships, and we completed our first a pilot program with the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce in the spring of 2019. And that was really the concept of saying, what happens if we give a micro grant to a local organization, give them the toolkits, give them the marketing materials and the messaging, and then ask them to work very closely with their local business networks and to be able to help them both have access to these toolkits, have the discussions around preparedness, and then also go through and take the Resilient Business Challenge. We're now currently running our second pilot, which is testing this messaging in Los Angeles, and then also testing alternative ways to share the information. Namely the idea that instead of making the big ask up front to go through the challenge, that we break the challenge into bite-sized pieces and flow it out on an ongoing basis to an audience. So it's the idea that you could say, hey, today would be a good day to call your insurance agent and check what your insurance status is. Or hey, today would be a great day to do a visual check and make sure that your bookcases are secured to your wall. So really incrementally pushing this information out. Through the pilots, we've uncovered a lot of great information that we'll be incorporating into the campaign. The first is really important. It's about providing incentives and discounts. We know that with all businesses, particularly those that are small or mid-size, resources are definitely one of the first questions, and you have to think about return on investment with anything you make in terms of your dollars, time, staffing, et cetera. So we definitely understand the need, and we'll be working on setting up a discounts page where if you go through the challenge, then you will be able to unlock discount codes with companies that offer services that can be helpful with this type of work. We also have played around with the idea and really need to know that this is really where one of the crux issues is on insurance, and thinking through, is there a way to work with the insurance industry to say that if you go through this challenge, then this resilient business nomenclature has a value with your insurance rates. We've also understood we need to really simplify the content and the user experience. While we talk about this day in and day out and use a lot of acronyms and a lot of phraseology that's very specific, when you're working with a business that is an expert in something else, making sure that we've created this information in a way that is very user-friendly for somebody whose expertise lies in a different field. The other thing is really making sure that we have that hands-on and in-person experience opportunities, either through workshops or through our local ambassadors being able to go to local businesses and being able to help provide them with kind of an introduction into the toolkit so that they in person to be able to make that first step and that first barrier even lower. The other thing, and this is one of the reasons that I'm really excited to be here today, is this idea of bridging real life stories into the content and into the campaign. So today, I think, I'm walking away with a very valuable iPhone that has 5 videos of stories of local business owners where they're telling their story and then they're giving their advice to peers. And I think that that's the kind of information that's really going to capture the imagination and also capture the urgency of why it's important to take these steps and to carve out a bit of time and carve out a few dollars to make sure that you're positioned appropriately for a natural disaster and what that may mean for your business and your employees. And then, as I mentioned earlier, then it's also about making sure that we're flowing out the information in a way that is bite-sized, manageable for folks who are really busy. I heard a number of times today that one of the biggest challenges is that you have the dual responsibility of both being a business owner and then also getting through the number of gates that we set up in terms of being able to apply for SBA loans, register at your local area coordination cell, be able to really do all of the recovery work whilst still trying to keep your business running in a situation where many times your employees may or may not be able to come into work during those first emergent moments. And so making sure that these are designed for very, very busy business owners who are wearing many hats in their day-to-day, and then even more hats during a response time. We are getting ready to, kind of changing gears a little bit, we're getting ready to pretty fundamentally change the way that this campaign goes forward. To date, the management has been Selena and I. We have been working through our respective, through Seismic Safety Commission and BCSH to run the day-to-day of this campaign, to develop the content, to oversee the contractors, to work with our partners and to really build up and design this campaign. And we're getting ready for a pivot. We are going to partner with a 501c3 organization, California Academy for Economic Development, and they will be assuming the day-to-day management of the campaign, and we will be forming an advisory board that is chaired by BCSH, and that includes representation from local and state organizations. We think that this will give us a really good space to be able to hire full-time staff, to be able to have kind of the level of effort that this campaign needs to be able to really to be able to move forward. The other major change is that we will be looking at this local ambassador approach, where we rely on a network of organizations throughout the state to do the groundwork with local businesses. And how do you do that, you say? Well, if you remember, the planning and development was, of course, funded by the Seismic Safety Commission. The launch, the outreach, and the pilot programs were all generously funded by 9 private partners. And I'm just really excited to say that as of last week, we have been awarded a major philanthropic grant that will be announced very momentarily that will fund our next 2 years of work on this campaign. So it opens up a lot of opportunities and gives us the ability to really scale, particularly to start at the regional level, focusing on Northern California, and then we're moving forward to use this money to then leverage a federal grant that will allow us to take this statewide. So a great pivot point for the campaign, and kind of positioned, I think, to be able to make this move forward at a much more rapid clip. And then for those of you in the audience, I know there's always the question of, like, how do you get involved? How do you learn more? And so I think the first thing is to visit outsmartdisaster.com. It's built as a way to help individuals, local governments, and businesses. And I'd really encourage you to get on and explore the site. Certainly send us an email if you have any questions, or if you want to see how we can make this campaign work for Ridgecrest. And with that, I think that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Great. Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions of the Deputy Secretary? I don't think so. I will just say for the audience, this is in... Oops. I'm sorry. We do have a question?
I
Go
did.
ahead.
Thank you very much for being here today, and it's nice to know that you were able to not only come present to us, but also meet with some of the local businesses to talk about how this dovetails with their experiences. Okay, I won't ask you who's the grantor.
I'll tell you in a couple weeks once it's all
That's
signed
not
up.
momentarily. Momentarily is right now. You promised momentarily. The board members that you're going to put on this new entity, I assume that's organizations such as the East Bay Leadership Council, large business type organizations that you're trying to, that are worried about the economy and our economic development.
Yes. So we're still working through the details of what the membership will look like, but that's absolutely the place we're thinking about, is thinking through who are kind of the push points for the stakeholder groups that this campaign is really trying to target. Because I think that there is a tremendous amount of value in being able to see who cares the most, and and equally as important, who has access to these networks. And so I think that the economic development centers are very important partners on this.
Thank you.
Great. Excuse me. I was just going to say that really the overall intent of the Outsmart Disaster campaign is to help businesses become more resilient. It started pointed at response to seismic events, but it really is applicable to anything that would disrupt business in a large way, whether it's a storm or a fire or a riot, anything that can disrupt a substantial portion of the business sector in an area, this is applicable to. So I'm glad you did get to talk with the chamber people, because they, I think, will be among the most interested and best able to get the information out locally. So thank you very much. Did anybody else have a question?
Okay.
Thank
you.
Chief, you are back up, sir. Is this the closing? Yes, sir. Kind of looking for your thoughts.
Thank you guys
on,
for coming,
yeah,
and
the
see you
day.
next year.
No, actually, your appointment can be done quicker than that.
Actually, a lot of people went over everything I had on my notes, so I'm not going to rehash all of it. So just a quick story since my boss is here. Kind of funny that when Ken was here earlier, Ken and I became good friends through this whole thing. And so much so that I think I'd been up for, 40 some hours maybe at that point. That I decided it was a good idea with the mayor, my boss, and the governor and his entire staff that I'd give a geography lesson to everybody and drew out the whole quake sequence and everything in my conference room. It was probably quite embarrassing, but at that point I don't think I knew what I was doing. So yeah, it was pretty funny at the time. But city managers go, what were you doing? I said, I don't know. But yeah, it was entertaining. When I looked at it later, it was just a bunch of lines on a board, so I don't know what I was doing at the time. But yeah, so when the first quake hit, I was like, as everybody else said also, I was getting ready for barbecue the 4th of July, and was at the store and ran home, told everybody, well, I guess I'll see you when I see you, and down here in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and next time I saw him was to go home and put this on for the first press conference. So when I got here, dispatch was obviously chaos, and we were overwhelmed at that point. Our resources were overwhelmed with our limited staffing, and fire, I think, was 8 firemen and our 4 patrol guys, including a sergeant at the time. So my first call was to Sheriff Youngblood. So within a few minutes, he was at his cabin. He said he felt the earthquake, saw my number pop up, and goes, oh, I know where it was at. So all I said was, I need a helicopter to assess damage. I don't have the resources to do a windshield survey. He said, not a problem, it'll be on its way. So they diverted it from the lake to come over, so it was here within a few minutes. After I hung up with him, I called CHP, Lieutenant Williams down there in Mojave, because their protocol is right after an earthquake, they have to do an assessment of all the overpasses. So they had an airplane up, and once it completed its survey of the overpasses, they diverted it up in this area as well. And so probably within a half an hour, we had 2 air units overhead, plus fires, I don't know when it got here, surveying the city from above, while our ground units were putting out fires and turning gas off and going call to call. So yeah, the overall response right away was incredible. I received a text message from our neighboring city, California City, which is about 40 miles from here. All he did was text 2 on their way, so I knew we had resources coming. And Bakersfield PD did the same. They sent 4 officers and a sergeant. So I knew that being a holiday, a lot of my people were gone as well. So I knew that some were coming. And then as right when I pulled in, one of our retired sergeants pulled in at the same time. So when we walked down the hall, he walked into dispatch, and I looked at him and said, "You got this?" He said, "I got it." So he took that part over, and it freed me up to start making calls. Then as people started pouring in, volunteers, officers that were off duty, then we were able to start deploying them out and assigning them and start covering the city as we needed to. So then as it started calming and we started to assess the damage, and as reports started coming in and where the damage was located, it was mostly internal, and no reports of any fatalities or anything that yet. We didn't. We weren't sure as far as inside of any buildings. Those are hard. You can't see in there, obviously, so we didn't know. So once Cal OES and those groups started showing up, then we were able to sit down and talk. And when we put out the request for mutual aid, we did that for several reasons. One of the main reasons, now we had people sleeping outside. Even after the first one, people didn't want to go back inside because they didn't know if their house was safe to sleep inside yet. So the other key was also the looting factor, and people, Ryan from Cal OES, the chief from Cal OES, they said that they've seen people drive from several hundred miles to locations to loot stores and businesses and whatever they can get their hands on. So that was a big reason. And then also we didn't know at this point what else was to come. We didn't know, what other aftershocks we were going to get, or was this, we didn't know what we were in store for after this. So we put the request out for mutual aid, and so we flooded the city with law enforcement and fire. And I think it was key to put that out there that these officers were going to be there. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, I guess it's next. So I think that was key to let all of the community know that, one, these officers were here, and they were going to be here all night and patrolling the city. And I also put that over, most people saw all the cameras that were here, and I also let the country and anybody that wanted to come up here and loot know that all of these officers were going to be here as well. So I think that was part of a deterrent. We did end up with two situations where we had two businesses broken into, and some things were stolen. One of them looks kind of like a crime spree. We've identified the suspect. He's done some other things down in San Bernardino and some other southern cities. So our DA is waiting anxiously for him to be caught. So as soon as we catch him, then I'm sure she'll be very happy. So they patrolled throughout the night. I think that helped calm some of those citizens that were sleeping outside, sleeping in the park back here and other places. So then on Friday, I had the pleasure of attending the briefing out on base, where I met Ken Hudnut and Janice Hernandez, where they gave the briefing on the 6.4 crossfault quake. And I think I annoyed Ken a little bit with my questioning, which was all right. And eventually I asked him to come here to give the same briefing to my staff here, and invited the mayor to come listen to what Ken had to say, because it was very concerning to me what he said with the 1987 quake. It was funny because when I asked him to explain, I said so what you're telling me is this fault crossed another fault? And he said, yes. I said, well, have we seen this before? And he said, well, yeah, we've seen it a few times. Well, how many times? Okay. He said, well, a handful. I said, all right, well, when was the last time? So then he started rattling all these quakes off in 1927, like he told you earlier. And then when he got to the 1987 one, I think that's when it kind of struck that, we could be looking at a second eruption or a second shock. So he came back and the mayor told the story of how we kind of believed that we were going to get a second shock at some time, and just happened to be an hour after Ken finished his briefing here at the station. So when the 7-1 shock happened, it was quite different for us because within our building, we lost our CAD system and our radio system right away. And so we transferred everything over to Kern County. And so that was quite different for us right away. So we weren't able to, enter that stuff in and handle that for quite some time. And wouldn't you know it, the only tower that wasn't strapped down is the one that controlled that stuff. So our IT department got on it, got it fixed, and we got back up and running, and I'm happy to announce it is strapped down now. So and then it was I know there's been a lot of talk about the EOC, and with our EOC, we were lucky to have Cal OES was in there the whole time. The Kern County Fire, which they are great people, and I had the mayor and Supervisor Gleason in there, and the benefit of having these guys in there were with having the supervisor and the mayor, they were able to reach out to people that, they were able to make those important calls up to the top when we needed things. And then Cal OES, that you guys can get stuff that's amazing. I know that Commissioner McCarthy and I were talking, and he's like, is there anything that you can think of that you couldn't have gotten? And I was like, no, I think I could have pretty much gotten anything that we wanted. And in Kern County Fire, we're, with the unified command with the PD and them, we made a great team, and that's I think that was key in this whole thing. Getting along with everybody is the key. You have to have a good working relationship with everybody, and when you do, it's going to run much smoother. And and having good people, I mean, that's instrumental. The men and women that work for me, they made me look good. I'm not that good, so they're the ones that made me look good. So them and all of the responding agencies from Kern County and Cal OES and FEMA that came, those were all those guys were incredible that showed up. And there was a lot of people here, a lot, which goes into my next part. Some of the issues that we identified through this that we had, being the 4th of July, getting a hold of the utility companies at the beginning were, utility company, because PG&E was pretty easy. Eric he was amazing to work with. We had some trouble getting a hold of Edison, in the beginning, and Ryan was here in our EOC with us at the time. So he tried to get a hold of him, and he couldn't. So we had to go up to the director, and the director called the president of the company, and that's how we got a hold of him at first. So there were some problems with the number, and basically when we first got a hold of him, we were treated like a residential customer. We had to go through a checklist, and we're like, no. So, but once we got that sorted out, then it was flawless after that. And so updating those numbers is very important. And what happened was, I guess the person was on vacation or something, and they just didn't update who was next. And then our EOC area, which we used the PD side, and there was too many people in there. So we've identified next time all the first responders will have an area. We'll probably use our senior center. So all of them will check in and out of there, so we can keep the EOC a little lighter, just to have the people that need to be there to come in and out, because it became overwhelmed in there. And as far as what we're used to, we're used to dealing with emergency situations, all the time. And I would like to say that we're good at dealing with those, but those are usually short term. It might go 12 hours or so, and you're moving on, it's wrapped up, and you move on. When it runs into these things, days, week, those we're not, cities usually aren't too used to those. Fire departments, counties, those guys are great at that. And so some of the other things we learned were have somebody doing the documentation of all of the forms that you're going to need right away. So put somebody in place for that right away. And Georgiana from Kern County, we've talked about this a lot. So have somebody that's just responsible for that, so that all of the guys checking in and out, make sure that they start the form and then they collect them at the end, so that you're not trying to hunt them down later. And then some of the things that I think we did well or started was the information sharing with the public. I think that we got it out there quickly. We tried to. We did constant posts on Facebook. And one of the things that I think that we learned through this whole thing that is important to get out there to everybody is nobody reads anything. We put the same information out in text, and it would get very few hits on social media, and you could put the exact same thing out on a video and it'd get 30,000. And so that's what we kind of morphed into, putting everything video and then put it also in text. And so yeah, the video seemed to work a whole lot better than the text did. So, or use both. And then radio, obviously we tried to do that as much as we could, putting it out on radio as well, because for those people that don't have social media. And then we still had some people complain that they didn't get information. Well, they don't have social media, they weren't listening to the radio. We don't have a local TV station here, so we had boards up around town that we tried to post to as well at the most popular spots, Walmart, the grocery stores, and things like that. So trying to figure out, and we had our message board up, so trying to figure out other avenues for the future is what we'll have to work on to try to get those people that might not have that, or smartphones. A lot of people don't have those either. They still have the old flip phones. So trying to get the message out to everybody is kind of difficult. And then keeping the officers and high visibility within the community, I think put them at ease. Then calling the town hall quickly. I did that on Sunday. I think they were kind of mad at me for that because I think it was 10 o'clock in the morning. I said, hey, let's do a town hall. Sure, when do you want to do it? I don't know. Is 2 o'clock okay? No. So I think we did it at 4, I think it was. So I gave in to 4, and Jason Patton's staff and Caesar and his guys, they cleared all of the Red Cross stuff out and set that place up within a few hours. So yeah, they appeased me. So that was great. And then we did that event, and then we also did an event out in the park where we're guessing about 4,000-ish, somewhere in there, people. We did a movie to try to get everybody together. We did that on the 9th, I believe it was. And so one of our local businesses, Toyota, and my wife did that. And so they came to me on Monday. Hey, you want to do an event? I said, yeah, sure. When do you want to do it? No better time like today. Well, they said, no, that's not going to happen. So I said, okay, well, tomorrow's fine. So they did it on Tuesday, and they pulled that together, and it was a huge success. So I think doing stuff like that to get the community back together was really important. And one of the other big things that we do, I know it was talked about earlier, was our monthly EOC meetings. We meet every month. We bring in all the stakeholders, or try to. Some months, not everybody shows up, but stakeholders from the city, county comes over and meet and talk about planning for different types of disasters and events and stuff like that. So we meet on a monthly basis and talk about these things. So Mike Cash over there, he's a big part of that too. He's with Racy's or Aries, which one? Racy's. Yeah. So I think that's a big part. I don't know too many other cities in the county that meet as often as we do, but I know that's a big part. One, everybody gets to know each other and, communicate and develop that relationship. So that's a big part, as I think the Red Cross is the one that spoke about it earlier. So getting to know Barbara, and she gets to know everybody else, so she already has those connections. Then I took a bunch of notes from today. Supervisor Lovingood talked about the training aspect, and I know that I had talked to a couple of the Cal OES folks and why they've been here, and I know that they do a lot with the county and stuff, and they've talked about that. They started to morph into the cities and start to do a lot more with the cities and stuff like that. So I think that's important to get into the cities more directly from them, so that we know more of what you have to offer and what resources that you have to offer. And so that we build, I know most of them now, but I didn't know any of them other than Mike Cash over there that had anything to do with Cal OES before. So getting to know those guys and build those relationships, I think, is important. So getting them into the cities, I think, is a huge thing. And I think that another important factor for us is that relationship that we've built with Kern County Fire and the agencies around here. Our relationship with the Sheriff's Department and CHP and all of the other agencies within Kern County, even our neighboring county, Inyo County. we were just up there 2 nights ago helping them on the fire. They called for mutual aid. So I know that Kern County and Inyo County, because they came down to help us with the earthquakes. They just, so having those relationships is a huge thing, huge. I can't emphasize that enough. And I don't know if that exists elsewhere, because I live here in this, I've only dealt with what we have going on here, and I know that's a huge part of Kern County. So then the ICS incident command system, we train in that, and that's what you train in, and you put it to work, during this event. You'll do tabletops and stuff like that, but until you actually have the real event, that's just what it is. It's a tabletop. So, if you look at the way law enforcement, and I'm not sure about fire, what their turnover's like, but law enforcement over the past 5 years, we've had a big turnover. Most of the officers that we have now, I was long out of high school by the time they were born, so they're all fairly new, and so their ICS experience is a little block in the academy. So I think that we need to continue to expand on, and let's face it, I know that most of you have probably sat through that stuff. Let's face it, it's not the most entertaining instruction that you're ever going to sit through. And I think if it's more of a hands-on type of thing, I'm not sure how to incorporate that into it, but it's rather boring. And I think it turns a lot of people off, but I think that there's got to be a better way to train people on how to deal with these situations other than that. I know it's important because it builds the foundation, but there's just got to be something a little bit better than that. The clearinghouse, the commissioner and I have talked about this. I kind of got chastised for not dealing with the clearinghouse like I should have more, but we having the clearinghouse right across the way here. But as I told Mr. McCarthy there, that I had Ken right at my fingertips, so that's probably why I didn't deal with the clearinghouse as much. But I know we talked about how to get them more recognizable identification and how to get them so that we know who they are and what they're able to do. And so we talked about some of the designations that Ken Hudnut has on his ID card. He has a designation that allows him to go into any disaster that there is. But with that comes some specialized training through probably FEMA and other organizations that allows him to have that. So, maybe we could look at something like that for other people that work in the clearinghouse. And so, but then, like I was telling the commissioner, that, however, people like me and other municipalities and probably county agencies, we need to be trained on what the heck that even means. So what that designation means, what it gets them, and where they're allowed, and what they're going to be doing. Another important thing that came out of this was the importance of having a trained PIO. And when I talked to Andrew Andrew was the PIO that I had, thanks to the Kern County Fire Department. And if Chief Witt would have tried to take him, I think we would have been fighting over him. So he said that he had gone through the FEMA PIO courses. So I went on and I read about what the courses do and how they focus on training the PIOs to calm the community and do that stuff. So I think that's very important that communities know that that's what it is, because when you look at the PIOs that we would use, it's a 2-day course that, you know, just focuses on standing up in front of the camera and delivering a short, quick message. So I think that's an important thing in a disaster, is how to deliver that message of calming the community and what message to deliver out there. I know we talked about mental health a lot. I didn't bring him in fast enough, I don't think. So I did bring him in. I brought him in a couple times actually, but the first one I brought in was the same one that we use for our officer-involved shootings. And then I brought in Kern Behavioral Health as well. They were in our department for about a week and rode along with the guys and had a good time with the guys. So, but I not only brought them in for the officers, I brought them in for the families as well. So that seemed to work. And then the other thing was what to do with the first responder families during these, because they're just sitting at home. So I spoke with all of them, and they brought up some valid points. As they were, that's exactly what they were doing, just sitting at home. And they were like, "Why don't you just put us to work? There's plenty to do. Give us something to do." And I was like, "Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we could have used you." And you know, some of them said, "Look, we had a perfectly good daycare center over there. The kids could have been over there, and some of us could have watched them. The other ones could have done a lot of other things." So that's a good point. And I reached out to Nicole from Cal OES, and she reached out to all the agencies to ask them if anybody has a plan for the families out there, because I know that during the fires, you always hear the fireman putting out his neighbor's house while his is burning to the ground and their families are gone, and nobody has a plan out there for the first responder families during these disasters. But then, so I think that's something that's important that we need to look at. And then the rock star over in Kern County, Georgiana Armstrong and Wendy Benson, they're our go-to for everything. So when we want something, we call them, and then they call Cal OES and ask for it. And some of the points that weren't touched on earlier. So when we needed inspectors for the buildings, that's who we'd call, as Georgiana. And Michael probably didn't know some of this, so I'll go ahead and touch on it. The city managers all got together at their monthly meetings, and we have an MOU in the county that we will share resources within the county. So Georgiana reached out, said, "Hey, we need building inspectors." So they sent building inspectors, but that wasn't enough, because I know we did about 1,000, maybe more, building inspections, which are still going on. So when that wasn't enough inspectors, then Georgiana reached out to, we had people here from Sacramento, Lancaster, Palmdale. We had them from all over the state. So, which leads me into the form that, or the confusion. So we've talked about that as well. Excuse me. Dang cold. This is a huge problem. The form itself, not only for the inspections, but it's also been a huge problem in the recovery process. Because now, with the red tagged properties, because they're not living there, it's been hard to find these people. And then depending on the inspector that went over and inspected the property, we don't know the level of damage. With some of the yellow tag properties, when we've contacted them to see if they fixed the property, they're like, well, it wasn't yellow tagged, but on our spreadsheet it says it was. And so it's been rather confusing. So Georgiana and I have talked at length about this. So what we've decided to do, and she's leading this charge, she's gotten with the Kern County Fire Department IT department person, and we're going to have a Kern County standardized form, which has, I can show you what the form looks like. It's got a bunch of information on it, which includes all their personal information, name, phone address, phone numbers, next of kin in case we can't get a hold of them for some reason. But then it's also got the damage, insurance information, so that we know whether or not they had earthquake insurance or not. And so it would fit all of those that we need for the individual assessments for FEMA and CDAA. So we would know all that information. And this form then also they're going to create a database. So one, it will be digital, and so they could take it into the field, but then we will also be able to enter it into a system. So it will be accessible to anybody that needs it, like Kern County, or like if the city had it. So the fire department would maintain the system, and if Tehachapi had a disaster, they can provide the link, and Tehachapi can put the link up on their website, direct their citizens to there to fill this information out, or they can print them, take them in the field to the inspector can take it into the field, jot their stuff on, and then they can transcribe it into the system. So that's kind of how we're combating that issue. Hotels. So one of the problems that we had with the hotels, and I don't see Dan here, so I talked to Dan. He is runs our Spring Hill Suites and stuff, so I talked to him at length, and some of the problems, and I believe I can say that this happened with all of, or the majority of our hotels. So after the earthquakes, the hotels, their staff left. So they were very minimum staff. And when they called around other hotels and asked, hey, you got some staff we can borrow and we'll share it, and the answer was no. So they were scrambling, trying to keep the rooms up for first responders and all of the resources coming in to make sure there were rooms available for people to stay at. And it was very difficult. So that's going to be a problem pretty much anywhere. One of the other things that was pointed out was none of these hotels have generators on them. And, when you're building a few $1 million hotel, really what's a generator that costs $100,000, that's not really a big expense added to it, I don't think. But the key thing was where he came from in Seattle, they had an emergency intercom system within the hotel. It was mandated. And he was surprised that California does not have such a system. He has no way to communicate with inside the hotel with all of the rooms. So he cannot pick something up and tell everybody to get out. so that he said that he saw that as a big liability. So, and he wanted me to bring that up, but I thought he was going to come, but he didn't. And I know we talked about the threshold for FEMA to the 56 million or whatever it is. The other one that I know that one might be hard to get changed immediately, but maybe we could look at the rural grant, because that one's not too far off population-wise. It's a few thousand, so maybe we could look at, maybe they could do something and adjust the rural grant threshold to where the citizens might be able to apply for the rural grant in populations such as ours, to be able to help them get their properties fixed. So I think I'm sure I left somebody out to thank, but the other thing that played a major role was we used the media, I think, pretty well. The media that was here. In fact, I had asked them on a couple of occasions, especially our Bakersfield media, to run certain things for us, and they were more than happy to do that, and did it. So, I think that they were very happy with providing that service, and so I think using them to help us out was vital as well. So they were very welcoming in helping us out. Other than that, I think I'll take any questions that you have.
Do we have questions for the chief?
I just have one comment. One thing you said, and it's worth reinforcing, I'm really happy to hear it, as being in the fire service and having a friend who, a police officer who decided to end his life. The fact that you put it on the radar about the families and the PTSI with your officers is fantastic, and we're working statewide to try to bring, as I'm sure you're aware, bring that issue up to the forefront and get people to talk about it, and because it's a big deal and a big problem in the fire service and in law enforcement, and it warms my heart that is not only just on your radar, but a big deal for your officers, but also the families, because what we're finding in the fire service is the agencies are not reaching out to the wives enough, and the husbands that aren't in the fire service, they don't understand what we're all dealing with, and that'll help bring it in. So thanks for that.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, some of these things that you just described, I would never even have thought of, and I thank you for your insight on those. On the inspection form, that's sort of an issue that we're dealing with right now is, okay, you can put a form up, but what do you do to follow up? And then in your case, you're saying people disappear. So I think that's a really an interesting piece that might need to lead to some improvements for the entire state. So when you get what you finish, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with the commission, I think that would be a terrific thing.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Commissioner Morvelli.
Actually, it's kind of a question also for the representative from FEMA, Miss Ann Rosinski. I've heard a couple times the comment about this community disaster total didn't equate to the $54 million threshold, and then you mentioned there's a rural grant. My question is, you mentioned that right now FEMA's in the middle of a disaster recovery reformat. Are there specific public comment periods during that program assessment to for communities like this, Paradise, any of these other communities where some of the community leaders could provide input to assist with changing some of these thresholds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, it's not a question of changing the dollar threshold. That's a different process. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act, DURA, is a sort of omnibus piece of legislation that was passed about a year ago. And it includes several different initiatives to make the funding that is available. It creates new pots of money and it creates new ways to access that. At this point, though, how all of that is supposed to work has not been sorted out, and it's taking quite a while to work through those. So, as I mentioned, the earthquake early warning. In fact, I'll be back in Washington next week, talking with some of the people that are developing some of those policies. Ken and some of our USGS colleagues are working on that. And then there's the BRIC, Build Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. Again, it's a mandate, but there is no blueprint for how that is supposed to work. And I've had several people ask, so I'm more than happy if anybody's interested in providing input on that process to find out where you can provide that. I know one of my colleagues did tell me they sent an email and they got, just a sort of thank you, but this is not the email. Nobody's going to be monitoring this account, whatever one they sent it to. So I'm more than happy if anybody is interested or has comments to share. I will, be sure to get those comments to the right people. I know there will be a comment period. I just don't think they're at that point. I think there's so many different pieces to all of this, and there have been so many disasters over the last year that just even finding time to do these sorts of things has been really difficult. But like I say, feel free to let me know. You have my contact information. I'll be happy to find out an answer to that. But at this point, to answer your question about the thresholds, that is not actually a part of it. And I do want to clarify, too, I've heard comments about the specific dollar amount. There is a sort of general threshold, but there's a range of different considerations that go into it. So I just want everybody to know it's not a question of, well, we missed it by $1 or we missed it by $1,000. It is something that is it's flexible, and there are a lot of considerations that are taken into account in making that decision, just so that people don't feel like, oh, if we only had $1 more, we would have made it. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for staying, too. Thank you.
Other questions for the chief?
Thank you very much for the detailed list. And I'm from Walnut Creek in the Bay Area, and so we sit in all these communities that are literally contiguous to each other. And so one of the concerns we talk about in the Bay Area, and I'm sure it's also true in the Los Angeles Basin, San Diego, is when we have an earthquake, all of these communities are going to have the same problems, some to varying degrees, and we need to share resources, but we're all going to be helping each other. And so I'm really intrigued by the form that you're talking about, post-disaster, the inspections that need to occur. And to me, I don't think one piece of paper should be moving, that it needs to be somehow electronically done so that the inspector is using an electronic tool and is entering that data. The people are receiving it electronically, they're signing it electronically, and you get the right kind of data, but so that no one is taking time to enter paper forms and making those mistakes that so often happen. Human error, can't read writing that's done really fast. So, but I appreciate the ideas, because we need to share that data and have one system so that there isn't everybody not only sharing resources but inventing a new method each time.
Yeah, I think the goal would be to do it all electronic, but unfortunately there's probably going to be some people out there that don't have computers or a means to get on there and do it electronically. Of course, we could set something up. There could be a location to set something up and have them come down and do that. we're thinking is you could print that out and take it with you. So having it out in the field for the inspector, it probably depends on the disaster or where the location, probably where you're at. We were lucky we didn't lose cell service or internet or anything like that. So where maybe like Paradise, I'm not sure the circumstances totally up there, but my guess that they didn't have anything. So you probably would need something more hard copy in that area maybe.
I can see that for a Paradise because it was so devastating.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go to Santa Rosa where they had pockets that were wiped out, but the rest of the community was intact. And you have the ability in telecoms to get cells on wheels and the mobile resources that I'm sure you use in your arena all the time. But I just thank you for the ideas. I think a statewide system is really what's important because it is moving through the channels that are statewide and federal to get the funds that are needed. And so there's probably a standard list of information that's needed from people.
There is, because like most of the information is that we thought of was some of the information needed for the local assistance center, the Red Cross, the VOAD, and stuff like that. So, and SBA. So that's kind of the information we were looking for. And once we get it, then we already have it. We don't have to ask 15 times. And that's what we're running into. So.
Commissioner Marvelli.
I think just for a little bit of clarification, I don't know if you've been through the training, Jim, but I have for the safety assessment program. So for those of you in the room who don't know about this program, there's a training program you can go through if you're, and it doesn't have to be a licensed architect, structural engineers, fire officials, and so on, building officials, and you go through this training, you get certified, and there is a standardized form that is generally used. But you have to keep in mind what you're having in a disaster is just what you talked about, is depending on the size of the disaster, they're going through a list and they're saying, okay, I'm going to call these folks who are in this area to come out and do the first response to help assess, and I'm talking about buildings only and homes. And so that form could be enhanced, and there's a certain group of folks that actually design that form, and there may be reasons why there aren't certain personal information on it too. So I don't know the logistics behind it, but that could be. But there's certainly other enhanced ways it can be made better for these issues that came up in this community too. But then what happens is the next level is if it's a huge disaster and you've exhausted the folks that came out initially, there's a second wave of folks that come. And so what we're trying to do is when we're on the same page, we want to be on the same page and checking the same things. And so that's why there tends to be this standardized form. And there's always room for improvement. We've asked the questions about the electronic. You get into the same thing is, well, not everybody has an iPad, or they're not delivered yet, or or the Wi-Fi's down. I think that ATC, Applied Technology Council, is trying to put together. Most everybody has an iPhone now, and I think they're trying to look into going in electrified format. But I just wanted to give a little bit more background on what we're talking about here as far as the safety assessment program and the forms.
Other questions? I have one that I think you answered. It's not uncommon at all for cell service to be overloaded immediately after any kind of a big event like this earthquake. Did you say that your cell service was solid throughout?
Yeah, I think we had a little bit. I heard some people complain right after that they couldn't get through, but it was very short-lived. A lot of the officers are on FirstNet, so we have priority.
Right.
And then, but yeah, other than it wasn't very long. I know that.
That's
we couldn't get
That's
through it.
good. It is a real issue in more heavily urbanized areas because the first thing everybody does is pick up the phone and say, "Do you feel that? You okay?"
Yeah, and I know that, I'm sure like up in Paradise where it was,
It's just all
major
on there.
destruction.
Yeah.
Now they have the mobile cell towers, and we actually had one here that showed up. Verizon brought it in, and it was here for quite a few days just in case. And
great.
They were ready to go up if need be. So that's they self deploy now. He said. I talked to the guy, and he said, yeah, they self deploy for a period of time just in case. They don't want to be they don't want everybody to be down. So
It's good. Another one that I noticed was self-deploying is many of the insurance companies were setting up in shopping center parking lots.
Yep.
So, if your insurer is Farmers, you go find their Easy Up, and if it's AAA, you go find theirs.
Right.
And that was, I think, very helpful and reassuring to the residents, and they made it easier.
Yeah.
Well, Chief and all of you, thank you for coming, for participating in this, for educating us. I think there are some really good lessons that are coming out of this, which we can apply, really not just in California. Some of this will transfer lots of other places. I've enjoyed it. It's learned a lot, and again, for those of you who are from Ridgecrest, it's been a very welcoming community. Even at a time when it was difficult to accommodate an influx of people coming in, everybody had other things to do, and the hotels didn't have people to make the beds and change the sheets. Everybody was very nice and very helpful, shared information. We're interested in why we were here and what we were doing, and I was impressed by that. You have a great city. So, thank you all for this. If nobody has other comments, we will be adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry, we do. We do have one more place here where we ask for public comment before we adjourn. So if there's anybody who would like to address us this evening, now's your shot. And once again, they're not all running to the microphone. Okay, we will be adjourned. Thank everybody for your participation.